Hello, everyone. I'm just kind of waiting for a second. Part. Okay, well, I am going to get started. There's no one in here with me. I don't know if it's because of the weather or if it's because of memory problems. But I'm going to get started. For those who are watching this later on, who might this might come to your attention later, I do an annual Lenten Bible study. Last year got cut short because of COVID-19, but reinstated this year. If you're interested in coming in future weeks, we are here every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. in the social hall. I have the rooms set up so that there are 6 feet between chairs. And the request is that you come in with masks on and leave with the masks on. This year, hi Phyllis. Those of you who are watching, by the way, want you to know that I can see that you're watching. I can see if you have questions. There's about a 10 to 12 second delay between when you hit enter and when I see it. So even what I'm saying now is not going to hit your ears for another 10 to 12 seconds. So this year's Bible study is studying something that I have wanted to for some time. It's just one of those texts in the Bible that I think we all think we know the story of, because it's the story of Samuel and David and Saul, who preceded David. But I don't actually ever remember, outside of doing the discipled Bible studies so very long ago, that I've actually read through this completely and with the intention to study it since then. So I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I thought, hey, now's the chance. So during this Lenten season, we will be studying the scroll of Samuel, which, because it's so long, required 2 scrolls way back when. And so it became 2 books as time went by. So 1st and 2nd Samuel will probably tread a chapter or so into 1st Kings based on my studies here. So I'm going to try to do this as best I can. Like I said, if you are watching and you have questions, please type them. Just know again that it's going to be about a 10 to 12 second delay before I see it. On the board behind me, you can see that this week we are studying 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 7. This is kind of the story of the rise of Samuel. This is really a transitionary period for Israel. The book that precedes Samuel is the book of Judges, from whence you get the judges like Deborah and Gideon and everybody's favorite, or at least the one everybody knows, Samson. And at the end of that, the very last chapter, in the very last verses, really, there is an announcement of a yearly feast at the town of Shiloh. And so 1 Samuel picks up in true biblical narrative fashion with the introduction of "and there was a man." So chapter 1 begins, "And there was a man from Ramathaim Zophim, from the high country of Ephraim. His name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, and son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And this man would go up from his town year after year to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord. The Lord of hosts is how many of your Bibles will have it. I'm using a new translation this year, which I am just nerding out on. So this one says, and he would go to sacrifice to the Lord of armies at Shiloh. And they're the 2 sons of Eli. So now we have 2 wives and 2 sons. And the 2 sons' names are Hophni and Phinehas. They were priests to the Lord. So what we have here is, in this introduction, is the beginning of a remarkable birth. Which always, it's a pattern in Scripture when you look at it, because it's you see it with Ruth, or not Ruth, I'm sorry, you see it with Rebecca, with Sarah, with Samson's mom. He was born to a woman who was barren. So when at the time, and again, we have to tread that very careful line of then and now, because not to excuse then, but to understand then. And so back then, basically, the true importance of a woman was whether or not she could bear sons. Of course, we don't advocate for that now, but this is the heart of the story. Peninnah had sons and daughters, had plenty of them, and quite frankly, she was rude to Hannah all the time. And is actually quite characteristic in these stories also. The one who births the children tends not to be the one who is favored by the husband in the circumstance. So Elkanah actually loves Hannah, and I think he kind of deals with Peninnah. So we have a remarkable birth signal. And again, because we're tying the period between Judges and Kings, we have this nice little tie here, because Samuel is about to be born in this remarkable birth way, and just like Samson, he is going to be a Nazirite. And a Nazirite was somebody who was dedicated to God, no cutting of the hair, no drinking of fermented beverages, can't even eat grapes. So there were these restrictions, and basically it was a full-on life dedication to God. And you also get the association with Judges in here, in that by the time we get to the end of chapter 7, both Eli, who is the head of the temple at Shiloh, and Samuel, by the end of chapter 7, both will be called judges in some way. So, some of you might know the Song of Hannah, but there's let's go back a little bit, because this is a fun story, really, and we have to again take things with a grain of salt here. This is being written. I'm trying to put it in kind of a modern um, term that we can all understand, but it's almost like historic fiction. So a lot of the dialogue over time, people are pretty sure most of the dialogue was added later or put in there for flavor, or to accentuate the moment, or to make some distinctions. So this is important when you're reading a biblical narrative, especially the Old Testament. When people speak in there, they're speaking for a purpose. They're in the story. So they're trying to emphasize something that's going on in the heart of all this. So what we have is Elkanah and his two wives and Peninnah's kids all here at the festival, and they make their offerings and they take the portions, and Elkanah gives a single portion to Peninnah and their kids, and he gives a double portion to Hannah, and he makes this plea to her, am I not better to you than 10 sons? And she doesn't respond. I don't know if she's giving him the silent treatment. None of us know what that is. Or if she's just so sad, but she doesn't want to ruin the festival atmosphere that everybody else is having. But she does patiently wait until the end of the meal. And she gets up and she goes to the temple. And there is Eli the priest sitting in a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. Now, that may not sound, foreshadowing to you, but it is. Okay? Eli is sitting in a chair by the doorpost of the temple. And Hannah is just bitter and sad, and she's praying to the God, and she makes the kind of standard formulaic vow to God. She says, Lord of armies, if you will look on your servant's woe and remember me, and forget not your servant, and give your servant male seed, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. No razor shall touch his head. So the basic formula here is, if you give him to me, I will give him to you. And she has a little confrontation with Eli here, who, because she's praying, but she's not saying anything out loud, he thinks she's drunk. Today, that's not we're like, people kind of do that stuff all the time. But in the temple, in the practices of those times, silent prayer wasn't really a thing. So he jumps to a conclusion because it's been a festival also. So, he comes to this conclusion that she's drunk and says, how long will you go on drunk? Rid yourself of your wine. And she says, I'm not drunk. I'm just praying. And when she gives that explanation, he feels a little bit sorry for her and says, may the God of Israel grant your petition which you ask of him. And then she goes home. The festival is over. But when she goes home, the Lord remembers her. Key phrase. And she conceives and she gives birth to Samuel. And the name she gives him, Samuel, she says, from the Lord I asked for him. Now this is interesting because the word ask in Hebrew, and I'm going to try to write this as big as I can. I hope you can see it. Shul, okay, which is actually translated later as Saul, and of course we're going to talk about him. And there is an argument that probably what she said was, and I got to find it here in my notes. Sha'ul Me'el, which is asked of God. I should probably write that. This is interesting to me because clearly Saul and Samuel have, in our next class, you'll see the relationship between Saul and Samuel. But this name asked is going to follow us through for a while. So she's given birth to Samuel. The family is ready to go to the temple again. And Elkanah asks her if she's ready to go, and she says, I'm not. I won't go until the lad is weaned. Then I will bring him, and we'll see the Lord's face, and he'll stay there always. This is interesting. Nursing is going to come into this a lot. Not a lot, but it's going to come in interesting places. So we have a mom kind of unwilling to give up this son that she really fought hard for, and took a lot of verbal abuse for not having. And she doesn't really want to let go of him. And if you wait back then till a child is weaned, fully weaned, there's some evidence that is somewhere around 3 years old. Elkanah says, okay, do what's right in your eyes. Just make sure you fulfill what you promised. And then when she weaned him, she took him up there, made the offering of a 3-year-old bull, some flour, a jar of wine, and then she echoes what Samuel said, or not said, what Eli said to her when he says, may the God of Israel grant your petition which you asked of him. She comes in, offers the bull and Samuel, and said, the Lord granted me the petition that I asked of him. And then she goes on to say that all his days he is lent to the Lord. Loaned. Not given, loaned. And we go on to chapter 2, and it begins with the Song of Hannah. This is probably better known mostly because a lot of what is said in Hannah's song is echoed in what we call the Magnificat of Mary. Oh, there he is. Phyllis, we're doing 1 Samuel. I don't know when you asked that, but I just saw it. Okay. And we are now in chapter 2. Hannah prayed, and she said, and she sings this hymn, this psalm, which has a pattern of a reversal of fortune. Okay, this is a lot of what Mary would echo later on when she proclaims her Magnificat after being told she will give birth to Jesus. But there is a pattern of things where that which is high and mighty is brought low, and that which is low is brought up. For example, the sated are hired for bread. So those who are well fed suddenly get hired just to eat, and the hungry eat well. The barren woman, so the woman who is low, bears 7, which is also using number 7 is significant because it's perfection or completeness or wholeness. So the barren woman is made whole, and the many-sunned woman is bleak. There's some interesting parallels in here, but the point is it's a song about a reversal of fortune. I wish there were people here to feed off of, but it's the way it's going to be today. Yeah, okay. So a reversal of fortune, and I think this is going to be one of the key texts for all of Samuel. So it's something you should at least familiarize yourself with. It does have a very strange ending based on where it's placed in the story. The last half of the last verse is, "The Lord judges the ends of the earth. May he grant strength to his king and raise high his anointed's horn." Well, there is no king. It's been judges ever since they settled in Israel. And the judges come and the judges go, and then there's nothing, there's no kind of ruler over them in between. So this is where it's kind of like, was this stuck in here from later? Is this supposed to be a foreshadowing? It's just one of those things to pay attention to. Her whole song of the reversal of fortune, much of the language that's used in it, and this idea that there will be an anointed king is going to be important throughout both books of Samuel. After her song, she apparently leaves. Elkanah went to Ramah, to his home. And then you have the beginning of a bookend here. And this section is bookended by the phrase, "The lad was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest." And it ends with, "And Samuel was ministering in the presence of the Lord." And in between that, we have an introduction to the behavior of Eli's sons. These are priests. And they're bad. Eli's sons sin against God, and the first example they have is basically when the offerings were made, they would just go and take what they wanted from it. Sometimes they would even take it before it was actually offered to God, before the fat was burnt off it. And would threaten people. Well, the last example there is the man would say, "Let them burn off the fat now and then take for yourself whatever you want." And the sons would say, "No, for you shall hand it over now, and if not, I will take it by force." And the lad's offense was very great before the Lord, for they scorned the Lord's offering. But again, remember, Samuel was ministering in the presence of the Lord. A lad girt in a linen ephod. So we're throughout this first section. Oh, dry erase boards. You'll get Samuel ministering to the Lord. And then you get sons of Eli, and I'm writing that that way for a purpose rather than putting down their names. Sons of Eli are doing bad things. So this one, how did I say it again? They scorned the Lord's offering. That's what they did this time. Eli is old. He hears about what his sons are doing. He kind of, he rebukes them, but it's just weak. And they actually, he talks to them, and the next phrase is, they did not heed their father's voice. For the Lord wanted to put them to death, which sounds distinctly like, hardening Pharaoh's heart, right? And while they did not listen to their father's voice, for the Lord wanted to put him to death, the lad Samuel was growing in goodness with both the Lord and with men. So, I did miss that in this section. While he's chewing them out, while Eli is chewing this out, he says, "Why do you do such things of which I hear evil things about you from all these people?" He heard of all that his sons did to all the Israelites, and that they lay with the women who flocked to the entrance of the tent of assembly. And he says, well, it's not good. What I hear from the Lord's people are spreading about. If a man offends against man, God may intercede for him, but if a man should offend against God, who can intercede? So they scored the Lord's offering, and they're treating people poorly. Meanwhile, Samuel grows in favor. Not just growing in favor, but with the Lord. And with people. And immediately on the heels of that, the way it's phrased is, a man of God came to Eli and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, your sons are toast." That's a pattern too, by the way. Somebody coming to another person and basically proclaiming some horrible thing that's about to happen. And the promise that this person makes to Eli is that your house, and in fact all of Levi and the priests, will be destroyed and cut off from the house of God and from the altar, fall by the sword. And he says, "And this is the sign for you, that which comes upon your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, on a single day the two of them shall die. And then I will set up for myself a stalwart priest according to my heart." Which I love, because it just smacks of that whole idea of David being a man after God's own heart, right? This one's talking about Samuel, though. And where these young men are just taking whatever they want from the meat offerings, this ends with, "And it will happen that whoever remains from your house shall come and bow before him for a bit of silver and a loaf of bread, and he shall say, 'Add me on, pray, to one of the priestly details for a crust of bread to eat.'" So rather than just feasting on what is being offered, they're just going to beg for a crust of bread. And true to form, after that, again, we get the phrase, "And the lad Samuel was ministering to the Lord." Now we get into a story everybody's pretty familiar with. It is the God's call to Samuel. But there are two key phrases that happen right away. The word of the Lord was rare, and vision was not spread about. So basically what we have is this the author kind of hinting at the fact that there is a sort of breakdown in the professional performance of the house of Eli. And so we go on into the story, and it happened on that day that Eli was lying in his place. And this is where it gets important that we have these things up here. Because remember, we're talking about vision not being spread about, and yet Eli was lying in his place. His eyes had begun to grow bleary, and he could not see. So he could not see, and he's in the dark of his room in the middle of his night. Meanwhile, Samuel is laying in the temple of the Lord, and the lamp of the Lord had not yet gone out. So he's laying there sleeping in the light, so he can see. And in which that was where the room where the ark of God was. And then you have the call. And God calls to Samuel, and Samuel responds, "Here I am." And then he runs to Eli, and he says, "Here I am, for you called me." This again goes back to the point that the word of the Lord was rare. So not even Samuel expected to hear from God. He thought it was Eli calling from him. Eli says, "I didn't call you. Go back, lay down." So he went to lay down, and the Lord once again called, "Samuel." Again, Samuel's just a boy. Give him a break. He still thinks that it's Eli, so he says, "Here I am, you called me." And Eli says, "I didn't call you, my son. Go back and lie down." I think it's very interesting that he calls him my son at this point, as though he's given up on his own sons. But that's a sidebar, which somebody can discuss later. And again, follow that, and Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. Why? Because the word of the Lord was not widespread. And the Lord called to Samuel a third time, and then he goes back to Eli. "Here I am, you called for me?" And oddly enough, it's Eli who understands that it's God calling him. And he says, "Go back, lay down. If and when you hear it again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel goes back out, and then there is the fourth call. "Samuel, Samuel," and Samuel says, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And then the Lord says to Samuel, "I'm about to do such a thing in Israel that whoever hears of it, both of his ears will ring. And on that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house." So the first words of God to Samuel, and apparently to anybody in quite a long time, is Eli's house is toast. Because, interestingly enough, he did not restrain his own sons. Now here's a fun bit of trivia that comes into play, which again goes with vision and sight and that kind of thing. The restrain them word there, it's the word is kiha, and its usual translation is to grow weak, or to become dark, or as with the eyes of Eli, to become bleary. So in a way he was saying that he just turned a blind eye to his son's behaviors. This kind of lays out the role Samuel will play, not just with Eli, but with Israel and Saul. So just remember that these first words to him are words of doom, essentially. So Eli apparently lays down but doesn't necessarily sleep. And then it's back to business for him. He opens the doors to the house of the Lord. And he was afraid to tell, and I just love the way this is phrased, he was afraid to tell the vision to Eli, who was bleary-eyed, right? And now Eli calls to Samuel. Samuel, my son, again. To which he again replies, here I am. And in the next phrase, so I'm just going to read what Eli says to him. What is the thing he spoke to you? Pray do not conceal it from me. Thus and more, pray God do to you if you conceal anything of all the things he spoke to you. And Samuel told him all the things, and he did not conceal from him. And he, Eli, said, he is the Lord. What is good in his eyes, let him do. And I point this out because it goes again to this rarity of vision that was mentioned at the beginning of the chapter. Because in that we have, he didn't want to tell the vision to blind Eli. And then he asked, what is the thing he spoke to you? But the word of the God was not spread far. Pray don't conceal it from me. Not being seen again. Thus and more may God do to you if you conceal from me any of the things he spoke to you. And Samuel did not conceal from him. And Eli says, what is good in his eyes, let him do. So literally in 3 verses, we have 8 uses of references back to those words. And in a reversal of that, we get, so Samuel grew up and the Lord was with him, and he did not let fall to the ground any of his words. So Lord is speaking. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was stalwart as a prophet to the Lord. And here's the reversal. Where the word of the Lord was not spread abroad, and neither were visions, the Lord continued to appear in Shiloh, for the Lord was revealed to Samuel in Shiloh through the word of the Lord, and Samuel's word was upon all Israel. These patterns are important. The word choices are important. This is one reason why I like this. The translator of this, his name is Robert Alter. He is committed if a story or a poem or something like that repeats the same word, that it's very important to have it in there, and you can see why now. Because they're drawing these things into it. If the word of the Lord is not spoken and vision is not spread abroad, and the priest is blind, and it takes him 3 times to hear Samuel come in before he realizes, oh yeah, it's God. This is an epic failure of the high priest. And so we have the undoing of things. Remember, this chapter 2 was the reversal of fortunes. And then we have an intervening story. The only reason I think it's here is because it talks about how the Ark of the Lord, the Ark of the Covenant, moved from Shiloh to where it will be soon. And I know it's going to surprise you, but it has a lot to do with a battle with the Philistines. I know. I'll wait for your surprise. Israel sallies forth in battle against the Philistines, and they camp by Ebenezer, or Eben-Ezar, while the Philistines were encamped at Aphek. and the Philistines kicked their butts, plain and simple. And so the elders of Israel make this pronouncement. Why has the Lord routed us today before the Philistines? Let us take to us from Shiloh the ark of the covenant of the Lord, that it may come into our midst and rescue us from the hands of our enemies. And the troops sent to Shiloh, and then they took the ark of the covenant of the Lord of armies enthroned on the cherubim. And guess who carried it with them? If you guessed the sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, good for you. And I think this is one of those things that's a subtle jab. We see kind of the same behavior in the Christian church. You know, they're basically the elders of Israel, after losing to the Philistines, are looking for magic. The ark is like a magic vehicle. And so, of course, no matter wherever they take it, they can manipulate it for their own ends. And we do similar things in the Christian church. Probably the most obvious one, excuse me, is baptism. I don't know how many people I've baptized that I've never seen again, because we have treated it like it's a magic spell. Put water on the head of an infant, it is marked and therefore protected from all harm and from, hell, I guess. And you can't deny the reality of that situation. I also think, however, that people that believe that about baptism don't believe that in a vacuum. They believe that because they've been told that, either by pastors or by denominations or by people who they know who go to church or whatever it might be. And I think this is why it's important that Hophni and Phinehas take this, because they've basically been seeing the bad behavior of Eli and Eli's sons. The elders of Israel have been watching this. And, well, this is how you're supposed to act, right? As the priests behave toward God and the people, so the people follow their example. They think that God is at their beck and call and for their gain. And so they bring the ark into the camp. Everybody's cheering. It kind of freaks out the Philistines for a little bit, but their leaders give them a pep talk, and they just trash the Israelite army. Just about, the way they put it, the Philistines did battle and Israel was routed. Every man fled to his tent, and the blow was very great. 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel fell. They got their tushes handed to them. And the ark of the Lord was taken, and the two sons of Eli died. A messenger runs to Shiloh. Remember what I told you about? I'll go back for you. Chapter 1, just as Hannah is going in to pray for the birth of Samuel. Now I'm having... While Eli the priest was sitting in a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple, the messenger comes into town, and Eli was seated in a chair by the road, on the lookout. For his heart was trembling over the ark of God. I think this is funny, not over his sons, but over the ark. So the man comes into town. There's an uproar in town. And we get this statement that Eli is 98 years old and his eyes were rigid and he could not see. And the man said to Eli, Israel fled before the Philistines. What's more, there was a great rout. What's more, your 2 sons died, and the ark of God was taken. And the moment he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward from his chair through the gate, and his neck bone was broken, and he died. So when your mom tells you not to lean back in your chair, again, we kind of have this useless behavior of Eli just kind of sitting in the chair. And then here he is sitting at the gate and watching, and these are all there are going to be callbacks to all of these things. So try to remember them. And the news of the loss of the ark and the loss of her father-in-law, but not the loss of her husband, by the way. Phinehas's wife was pregnant, and she went into labor, and she gave birth, and she named him, are you ready for this? Ichabod, which means glory is exiled from Israel. And then we get kind of to a fun part of the story. Because the Philistines, after they won, they took the ark back to their main city. They put it in the temple of their god Dagon, put it right at the feet of the statue of Dagon, which is a no-no to God. God does not sit at any other god's feet. And they go out and they celebrate. The priests come in the morning, and the statue of Dagon has fallen. And they're a little taken aback by it, but they're like, there was a party last night. Who knows what happened? And they put it back up. They go through their day. The next day they come in. Dagon's statue has fallen over again. And it's literally phrased like it has fallen on the ground before the ark of the Lord. And this time, Dagon's head and both of his hands were chopped off at the threshold. Strong statement by God. But it gets better because these guys suddenly remember what happened to Egypt when Israel fled there. And they actually get very Egypt-like plague, which I enjoyed way too much. And the way that they put it in here is that they were struck with tumors and there were lots of mice. So very likely it's a bubonic plague type thing, but this is the fun part. And God struck the people of the town, young and old, and they had tumors in their secret parts. And I want to tell you why this is fun. Because in my preparation H of all of this, the word for tumors there, there is, according to this guy, and I actually went and looked, and there is quite an extensive debate about whether that word means tumors or whether it means hemorrhoids. I just get a kick out of that. God was literally being a pain in the butt. So the people in that town are like, we got to get this thing away from us. So they send it to the next town, and the same thing happens to them. And they're like, we got to get this thing away from us. And they send it to the next town, and it happens to them. And they're like, what are we going to do? This has got to stop. And so they're told, they consult a couple of seers and oracles, and they're told to send it back to where it came from, but not empty-handed. You have to make an offering, a guilt offering. Their guilt offering are 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice. Just just going to let that one sink in for a bit. There is by the way, I'm skimming over a great deal of language in here that just echoes from Egypt, including like, why should you harden your hearts as Egypt and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? And they are instructed to do, in order to bring it back, this is what they have to do. Make one new cart and take 2 milk cows that no yoke has touched. Harness the cows to the cart, but bring their calves back inside. You shall put the ark of the Lord in the cart, the golden objects, the hemorrhoids and mice, that you made as a guilt offering, you'll place in a chest at its side, and you shall send it away. To Beth Shemesh it will go up. And basically they said, what we're going to do is we're going to find out if this was all just happenstance, if it was just coincidence, or if God was really doing this to them. And here's why. First of all, the instruction to build one new cart is kind of obvious. You have to use a cart that hasn't been used for anything else. Then they have to get 2 milk cows that no yoke has touched. So they have not been used in ordinary labor. They have no experience as draft animals, so pulling a cart is just going to freak them out. Because they're milk cows, they're actually going to be in some pain because their calves have been put back into the barn and they're not going to be able to relieve the pressure in their udders. And so they're going to want to go back and relieve that pressure and also feed their kid, which kind of harkens back. Remember, I talked about that nursing and weaning type of thing with Hannah and Samuel. Here it is again, nursing cows. So they're not, and because they don't know how to pull a cart, it's going to freak them out, and they're just going to go all over the place. So if you get these animals who have no idea what they're doing, and every instinct in their body is telling them, go back home, if these animals are able to go to Beth Shemesh, you'll know that God did this to us. And so they did all of the things, and I love this phrase, the cows went straight on the way. On a single road they went, lowing as they went, and they veered neither right nor left. So the lowing in there, by the way, is also a rare thing you'll find about the animals in their biblical narrative. The lowing was pointing out that they were in pain. They were in agony, from the full udders. And they go, and they make it to Beth Shemesh, and everybody in that town, Beth Shemesh is a border town in Israel. Philistines drop it off, and they literally ditch it. And the people at Beth Shemesh do the right things. Really, they make offerings to God of the two cows, no less. They make the offerings of the gold. They split the wood of the cart so they can do a burnt offering. The Levites brought down the ark of the Lord, the chest that was with it, and they placed them on the great stone. Everything was done right, with one exception. And you get to this point, and it's talking about God. And God struck down men of Beth Shemesh, for they looked into the ark of the Lord. And he struck down from the people 70 men. And the people mourned, for the Lord had struck down the people with a great blow. And the people of Beth Shemesh said, who can stand before this holy Lord God? Basically, that's a question of who can serve this God? And who can we get to take this thing away from us? And So the people of Beth Shemesh, after some of their men disrespected the ark, sent messengers to Kiriath Jearim, saying that the ark is back. Please come get it, which they did. They brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill, and Eleazar, his son, they consecrated to watch over the ark of the Lord. And then you get to the point where you say, like, why didn't they take it to Shiloh? Well, it's very likely that Shiloh was destroyed based on other accounts, so there was no Shiloh to go back to. But they took it to Kiriath Jearim, and it stayed there. That's where it stayed for 20 years. No mention of Samuel, by the way, in all of this until this point, where he wants to make a pronouncement at Mizpah, a place that shows up twice in Judges again. So again, we're tying this to Judges a little bit. So that he says, assemble all Israel at Mizpah, that I may intercede for you before the Lord. So they assemble at Mizpah. They do a couple of rituals. The Philistines find out that everybody's gathered there. And there's some question about whether they mistook it for basically the armies gathering for an attack, or if they just saw it as an opportunity since everybody was gathered in the same place. So they came up against Israel, and the Israelites were afraid because last time they got their butts handed to them. And they turned to Samuel, who says, do not hold still from crying out for us to the Lord our God, that he rescue us from the hand of the Philistines. So Samuel takes a nursing lamb, there's that nursing reference again, and offers it up as a burnt offering to the Lord, and cried out to the Lord on behalf of Israel, and the Lord answered him. And just as Samuel was offering up the offering, the Philistines drew near to do battle, and the Lord thundered with a great sound that day upon the Philistines and panicked them. And they were routed before Israel. And again, remember I said Hannah's song is going to come to play as the reversal of fortune, but in other ways? The next to last verse of her song, the Lord shatters his adversaries, against them in the heavens he thunders. And the Lord thundered with a very great sound and panicked them. And they were routed. And then the men of Israel kind of did a cleanup job. Samuel took a single stone, set it up between Mizpah and Shen, and he called its name Ebenezer. I had to find this, Ebenezer, by the way, because as far as here the Lord has helped us. I had to look this up because there's a hymn that I've always wondered about. It says, here we raise our Ebenezer, right? The name Ebenezer means stone of help, with help being particularly a particularly military implication. The recurring name Ebenezer is meant to signify the righting of old wrongs. So to raise our Ebenezer is to stand before them and say, I will right the old wrongs. Which I also think, being a big fan of Christmas, is an interesting, I really want to know if Charles Dickens knew that when he chose the name Ebenezer Scrooge, who would, by the end of the book, right all of his old wrongs. So, that's the end of chapter 7, and I kind of picked through it, but the overall flow of this was that times they are a-changing. We are moving from judges into a new kind of rulership over Israel, which will become a monarchy. And in the interim, you have Samuel, who acts as prophet and judge. He will wander around for a long time. It's funny because and Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, and he would go about from year to year, which just echoes the beginning of this book that says from year to year his mom and dad would go up to Shiloh. And then he would go home to Ramah, where his family was. And we have the end of Eli and Eli's family as the priestly line. So we have a new place for the ark. We have the destruction of the priestly line, and we're coming on to the end of the judges. Things are transitioning pretty quickly. And in these first 7 chapters, and I did this because it included the entire ark story. Well, not the entire ark story, but it's there for a reason. All of these things set a pattern for the rest of what we're going to read. And I encourage you, as you continue to read it, I hope, that you'll, and if you haven't already, by the way, just read it so you can get some of these words and events in your head, so when you do read later on, you can go, oh, hey, that sounds like back then. And it's been interesting. There are many things that I didn't point out because I'm talking to the back of my phone. And because I really wasn't sure how long I was going to ramble if I included everything I put in my notes. But if you have questions, you can jot them down at any time. If you need clarifications, you can send messages on Facebook through the page or just to me on my phone. But I wanted, this is intriguing. Like I said, I've never actually studied this. I'm familiar with some of the stories. Wasn't familiar with that particular ark story though. But yeah, we're gonna get into the real, gonna get into the real intrigue now. It's gonna turn a little bit like a soap opera. So if you think it's gonna be boring reading, it ain't. So for next week, I have it down in the corner over here. If you can't see it, we're gonna read chapters 8 through 15. And this is broken down this way because we're going to get into the selection of Saul as the first king, and then by the end of 15 we'll have his rejection. All right, so I hope you found it interesting. I hope I didn't ramble too much. And again, I will post notes somewhere that you can have access to. That's also been requested of me anyway. But thanks for joining me, everybody who has joined me. And hopefully we'll see you next week, 6:30 p.m. Feel free to join us here at the church. Like I said, I've got this whole social hall kind of squared off. Chairs are 6 feet apart. You're all welcome to come here. And we'll discuss the continuing story. All right? Thanks, guys.